All right. I wanted to do a lecture and talk about a variety of different things. I'm trying to keep it going in a certain direction though, and the whole point that I'm trying to get across is free food. And I could get sidetracked and I could talk about self-sufficiency and sustainability. I think those two combined will solve all the problems that we're having today in government and the problems we're having today with the environment. Think about it. Those two put together. But people have to move away from working a job to pay someone for their firewood and working a job to pay someone for their food instead of growing it. Instead, we need to make this shift where we go get the firewood and we grow the food, and that is our job. Our life is our job. Now, the other thing is this idea of increasing income and having more income and focusing on that aspect. But I think people should attack or have that same interest in lowering overhead. It can come out the same. If you make $5,000, but every month you have to pay $5,000, you're getting nowhere. You're getting the same place as if you made $1,000 and you only had to pay $1,000. Making the same progress. But I could get sidetracked on those things, and I don't really, I wouldn't really mind, but I think a more important message is to get across to people how they can get free food by living in with these systems that I'll describe that all interrelate. And I'll talk about animal husbandry, the having of animals. I'll talk about aquaculture, traditional gardening, food preservation, composting. And so the thing is these all can interrelate, and that's what I want to explain. Let's start off with aquaculture, because that's a good example of interrelated systems, and not so much aquaculture as aquaponics. So let me explain the difference. Aquaculture is breeding, keeping, growing fish. Now, then you have aquaponics, and that's combining hydroponics with aquaculture. Now, hydroponics, and there's a lot of different ways you can do hydroponics, but that is growing plants using water and adding nutrient to the water. Now, when you have fish and you're growing fish, aquaculture, the biggest problem is keeping the water clean and pH levels and things like that. Now, if you take your water from your fish and you run it through a sealed grow bed, basically doing hydroponics then, and then together this is called aquaponics, but the plants will filter the water. The plants will use up the nutrients, its ideal nutrient, and they'll also convert the ammonia in the water. So you have huge successes with the vegetables and huge successes with the fish, because the fish make the water dirty. The fish fertilize the plants. The plants not only get fertilized, but they filter out that water. So now you have this symbiotic relationship between these two systems. And that's the whole point of what I was talking about. And I'm going to expand that out into chickens and into goats and rabbits and even crayfish and composting. But let's take it one thing at a time. So we're talking about fish, and I think fish are very important for the omega acids that they have, and I think that it's important for nerve development in children to have fish and things like that. I believe in keeping animals and eating animals. I didn't set up the system, but it sure seems obvious to me that all life eats life on this planet. And I don't have this vertebrate prejudice. I like plants just as much as animals. Some of my best friends have been plants. But anyways, it all works together. And so you have, just like we had the plants and the fish working together, and we can expand that out and utilize this similar method in other systems. So let's look at traditional gardening. And with that, you have growing of vegetables, let's say. And if you combine that with chickens, So now you're growing your vegetables, you're eating vegetables, you're giving your chickens the vegetable scraps. Some of the vegetables you harvest might not be the best specimen, so you might give some of the vegetables to your chickens, and then the chickens, they'll give you eggs. You can eat the chickens for meat, but the chickens also make compost. When you feed your chickens all these vegetable scraps, they're not going to eat all of them. And then in their pen, you're going to have straw and mud and compost vegetables and chicken poop. That is a magic mixture. And you put that in your garden, and now you're getting amazing vegetables, and the whole cycle starts over again. And so that's where the chickens really benefit you when you're doing gardening. And then you have, just like those fish, really benefit those plants in that aquaponics setup. But we can expand this out even farther. Let's take the aquaponics, for instance. What about growing duckweed? That can be fed to the fish if you're doing tilapia, warm water fish. But the duckweed also filters the water. So you can add another layer of this. What about the food for your food? Now, when you look at it that way, what if I'm buying the fish food? Well, you can sell some fish, and then you have money to buy the fish food. It can be a closed system. And so that's the idea, is to take all these systems and start to get down to the smallest part. I started this pretty simple, with just some goats and rabbits and chickens, and now we're doing crawdads and clams because they're great filters. But then your next step is going to be minnows and crickets and little freshwater shrimp and snails and algae and worms. And you start to get into the entire structure, the entire ecosystem of this. And when you're doing that, this should only make you food, and this should only make you money, because you're living basically with life. Now, let's look at some of the different types of horticulture, growing things. And I was talking about traditional gardening, and I've done really well with the raised grow beds because I can control what's in there. And but there's other ways that you can grow. I have a huge interest in permaculture and using 3 symbiotic plants together, like tall plants, and then you put vining plants, and then you put the creeping plants like squash and zucchini and things like that. But the main idea of permaculture is you are growing tall things that go down into the dirt more than 3 feet. That pulls up moisture from the dirt, and that benefits your medium tall berry bushes, let's say. And then you have things down in the bottom like strawberries that need shade. And so you're growing things together, not necessarily a grow bed of this and a grow bed of that. And permaculture is pretty interesting. The other thing that I'm into is vermiculture, which is growing worms. And the worm castings are great for fertilizer for the plants, but I also want to feed the worms to my fish. I imagine trout like worms. So we're putting in a 2,500-gallon trout pond this spring, and so that's something that I'm thinking of, is getting into the vermiculture. Another type of growing is hugelkulture, and that's interesting, where you bury wood, any of your wood scraps and sticks and little logs work best. You get them completely soaked. You put cow manure over that, and then you cover that with dirt. And the decomposition of the wood will create heat, and then that will fuel your garden in the spring and the fall, give you a little more moisture, a little more heat, and that works great for some of the different vegetables you might want to grow in there. But what vegetables should you grow? And that's the thing I wanted to touch on for a second. A lot of people think, oh, well, if things get bad, I'll just grow my own food. But it takes a couple years of practice. You got to figure out every plant in every little microclimate is going to need something different and react to the dirt different, react to the shade different, shade and sun. So it really takes some practice even to know with all these different plants, oh, that's what it looks like when the roots have gotten too much fertilizer. Oh, that's what it looks like when it's not getting enough sun or water. So it takes some time. And, I said this is all about having free food, but you also have to adapt a little bit how you eat. For instance, let's say you're eating out all the time. That's definitely not the most economical or efficient way that you could eat. I would stop eating out right away. If you're buying so many different ingredients, let's say you make a different meal every day, a different dinner every day, and each one uses 10 different ingredients. So you're buying something like 300 different ingredients a month. You got to limit that down, and maybe you have a little less variety, but maybe you eat a little healthier food. The other thing then, so maybe your grocery list isn't 57 things. Try to get your grocery list down to 10 things. Next, try not to use a grocery store at all. Buy things in bulk. If you only have 10 items, it's easy. Go to a food co-op. For the vegetables, we have a thing here called Bountiful Baskets, and that's a nice program. But we use food co-ops, things like Bountiful Baskets. We also, if we do need something, might go to Sam's Club and get it in bulk if possible. But we've gotten away from using the grocery store, completely gotten away from eating out, simplified our menu of the different types of food we're eating, and it's become extremely easy then to grow the few things that are easy to grow. You know, I buy bulk rice. I'm not going to make a whole rice field in my yard. So I'll buy bulk rice, I buy bulk oats, you know, but we try to grow everything else. And it's really interesting. You can grow edible flowers. You can grow a lot of different types of herbs very easy. But then you're going to need to come around to food preservation. And whether you're just vacuum sealing and freezing things, or whether you're canning things, dehydrating or smoking things, salting them, drying them out that way, you need to also look at food preservation, or you're just going to have these huge harvests that, if you're doing it right, that'll not be properly or totally consumed. Now, canning is what we use a lot of. It's very simple. There's a few different canning methods. You can use a pressure cooker to can, or just boil your jars in a water bath that you get up to boiling. And there's also steam canning. And it kind of depends on what you're canning. If it's meat, you want to use a pressure cooker. If it's just something that you're going to use up right away, you can use steam canning. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. But moving along, you know, I wanted to talk about the gardening there a little bit and some of the different types of gardening, the hugelkultur and permaculture and things like that. The next thing that I've started looking at is water. Get into gray watering your house. Get into collecting water from anything water drips off of. Have water storage on hand. If you have ponds and things like that, that's an emergency water source. Now, the other thing that I've noticed and thought of is with the aquaculture, you can't give medicine to the fish. Those chemicals are toxic, and so you got to do things a little bit different. You can do a salt shock for the fish or something like that, but know how to store water, and as well as collect it, haul it, use gray water. And even if you're getting, you have a well, that's awesome, but even city water, have a whole bunch of stored water should you need it. And you simply add, I think it's something like one dropper of bleach for so many gallons. You have to research that. I kind of forget, but that's how you store water. And so you have water. That's all very important. And then another thing that's very important is composting. What we've tried to work towards is no waste, zero waste. And this depends a lot on what you buy, but also the way that your food waste is more what I'm referring to. All of our vegetables go to the chickens or goats or rabbits, but meat scraps aren't so good for those animals, and meat scraps aren't that great for the compost. So I have crayfish, and let's look at that system real quick. The crayfish will eat my meat scraps. The crayfish can be an emergency food source. They will clean and filter water. Now, once they eat, let's say a chicken carcass, they eat all the meat off it. I can take those chicken bones. Let's say I have a meal of crayfish, and I take all those crayfish shells. You can grind that all up into bone meal to add to your compost. So you can add the crayfish and add some of these other little systems in this ecology of free food that will fill a little gap and help you out. So you got crayfish doing their job. You got worms doing their job. You got the chickens doing their job. And they're your largest compost creator, but easy meat. There's 1,000 ways to burn a chicken. And you can always sell the little babies in the spring. But what we like to do is, mainly just have them for eggs. And what I'd recommend is having some chickens for eggs, and those are your pets. And then you have other chickens that you have a large amount, and don't let your children name them or anything. And those are your meat chickens. But let's move along and talking about compost. Let's look at the goats. If you have goats, the compost that'll come from the goats, their poop and pee, it doesn't have urea in it, and so it's not as hot. And you can use that. It's also very good for compost. And the rabbit manure is good for compost. Some people soak it in water for a while to break it up and moisten it up, and they use the water also as a fertilizer. But the reason we did goats, let's go back to that idea of let's simplify our grocery list. Let's identify just 10 things we need. What is the most expensive? Ours was milk. So we got goats. And the idea with the goats is we have the milk. I don't personally like the goat milk as much, but I like goat cheese and goat milk kefir and these other things. And so we look at the milk. Babies, if they have baby goats, of course you need to have baby goats to have milk. You can sell the baby goats about $100 a piece, and that helps pay for food if you're not growing your own alfalfa and grass. But okay, so you have goats, and or you want to get goats. What I would look at is the dwarf goats, or little pygmy goats, and we have the Nigerians, and those actually pound per pound give the most milk. So that's why we went with those, the Nigerians. And goats are great, but I tell you what, you can have one goat that is peaceful and silent its whole life, and you can have another goat that is demanding and obnoxious. So just don't be afraid to get rid of that goat. And man, it makes things peaceful out there in the barnyard. But so you have goats. The next most expensive thing on our grocery list was probably beer. So right off the bat, brew your own beer and expand that out. Okay, so I'm brewing my own beer. What are the ingredients? Okay, can I buy them in bulk? Okay, next step, can I grow them myself? And so you start, looking at this, everything you do in a system. So, okay, so I've brewed this beer, and now I have all this, this mash, this sort of wasted mash that I don't need. Make little pellets, feed it to your chickens, and everything works together. And that's the point that I want to mention. So you have this sort of a surface level of, I have my fish and my gardening and my chickens and the crayfish and rabbits and goats, and I'm working with composting, and I'm collecting and storing water, and all those things are working together. And then you can start to look at the next level down. Growing the food for the animals, the grasses, the alfalfa, growing carrots, of course, for the rabbits. And then, like I say, algae and snails and freshwater shrimp and crickets and minnows. So there's quite a bit that starts to interrelate. And I think that's an important thing, is to get started and at least start one or two of these systems, because it will expand from there. And it starts to get, it gets fun. It has to be a hobby, and then you can take it to the next level and see how good you can get at these things. Everything you get, so everything you buy, you start to think, could I make this? Such as the easy one's firewood. Yeah, I can go get my own firewood. But then, okay, so you do that. Now you start thinking, well, what are the other things I could harvest? And there's wilderness harvesting permits you can get, and I'm sure there's tons of things out there. That's something I want to get more into. The other is, okay, so I've got this firewood. Well, how can I use that somehow beyond what's the normal box of thinking of, well, to heat your house? But, you can build walls, cob houses out of firewood, or you can take your firewood ash. At least take all the ash out of your fireplace, and especially in the winter, at least you get to put something in your grow beds and garden beds. But put that ash in there. Put that ash in your compost. And So that's the main thing. I want to start to kind of wrap this up a little bit. So I'll recap over some of those things. Mainly, it's that idea, self-sufficiency and sustainability, and starting to make everything work together. Make a little environment on your land, and you don't need a lot of land. Everything I've described, I've been doing on less than half an acre. So that's also why we have the miniature goats and so on and so forth. But yeah, you don't need a lot of land, and you can do these things. But so let me recap, talk a little bit about, what do you get out of this? And the fish, not only do they give you meat, but you can sell some of the fish. They'll fertilize your plants. What do I get from the plants? Well, of course, food for me, but also food for all the animals. And if you have an excess, you could sell those. But don't forget to collect the seeds, and you get your free seeds. And that's important if you're doing heirlooms and you are against GMOs, and you should be. And but look for things that grow in your area and collect those seeds. Native things will usually do better. Chickens, man, they give you meat and eggs. You could sell chickens as baby chicks, or even you could sell a frozen chicken. They give you compost. I talked about what the crayfish would give you and what the rabbits would give you. We've got purebred mini Rex rabbits. So we can sell those babies for anywhere from $20 to $50. We could also eat them. They also make compost. The goats, milk, also compost. Also, we could sell the babies. So as you look, everything is giving you food or money or helping in some way to fit a little niche. And so that's the main thing that I wanted to throw out there, and have people start to think in that way. And the things that I'm going to be getting into in the future, well, of course, we got the trout pond going in the spring, but solar. That's my next thought. Solar and wind energy. And if things get worse, perhaps subterranean dwellings. But at any rate, I hope I might have got you thinking about something, even if you already knew everything I was saying in the video. And everyone have a good day.